Bless you. Okay, is everyone set up? So, where are we at? Assignment number 1 was due during the hurricane, which obviously is not possible. So what I did is I extended the due date to today.
I already submitted it.
You're okay if you...
I submitted mine too on the 3rd that morning, so.
Okay. So is there anybody who actually needs this extension? Okay, so get this turned in today. Is today enough, or do you need more time than that?
Yeah, I just
Yeah.
had a question about zipping it, but I've got most of it, like all of it done.
Okay, see me after class, and
Okay.
I'll show you how to zip it. Anybody else? Everyone's pretty much set on this?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you feel pretty strong in the review? Okay, so we're a little bit behind because of the hurricane. So this next assignment is going to be due in 1 week. Normally I like to make them do in 2 weeks, but this is actually relatively simple. We're going to do an example in class today where it's like I show you a layout technique. It's kind of an older layout technique. You probably wouldn't do it on a Monitor website, but it's nice because it's simple. I don't want to jump right to the advanced stuff. I kind of want to walk you through steps 1, 2, and 3, and 4, till we get to the advanced stuff. And this assignment, it probably doesn't make sense as of right now, but we're going to do an example, and you're just going to have to add a couple of things, add your own content, and so on. So it should be a relatively easy assignment, but just keep in mind the due date on that is 1 week from today. So any questions on anything? We're kind of limited on time, so I'm thinking we can just jump right in. Okay, so let's make a new folder for today. Let me confirm I'm actually recording here. Yesterday I was recording for a class, and everything was recording, and every once in a while I opened this up and it said like dropped frames like 30% or something. I was like, oh.
Weird.
Yeah, that's probably not great. So if you see me kind of OCD checking this every 5 minutes, I'm checking for things like dropped frames to make sure that the connection didn't drop out. Okay, so let's make so you've got your CGS4828 wherever, your flash drive, your documents, wherever, doesn't really matter. Let's make a new folder for today. We're going to have a very large jump in dates here because we lost a week. So today is now the 10th, so 9/10/2019. Just to show of hands, in my opinion, I think I'm done with review for now. Like I said, I'll post it's kind of getting old now, but I'll post the lecture by the end of the day. Remember we had that lecture before the hurricane about CSS? I'll make sure to post that. I have like this auto add rule inside of YouTube, and for some reason it didn't automatically add it, and whatever. I'll figure it out by the end of the day. But does everyone feel comfortable with HTML and CSS? Like you felt like you got enough review? I know it had been a while for some of you. Classes, IDs, element selectors, just the basics. I'm not going to make you do super crazy stuff because in practice on most websites, you don't have to do that. So why teach you kind of all kinds of corner cases when we can spend the rest of the time in class actually doing some things that are maybe interesting. Okay, perfect. So we can jump right into new stuff. I'm going to go ahead and open up brackets. And then I know it's kind of tough to see this, but you've done this before. You click the little button to set the folder. Hold on, there's a little shortcut here. No, that did not do that. Windows key plus maybe? There we go, okay. So you should have like your working files, but then a little button here pointing to a folder. Some of you may, if you haven't like used brackets in a while, it might say getting started, but here points to my last folder I used. Click that, open folder, and then set it to the folder you created with today's date. I know it seems like kind of a silly thing. It's like, why do we have to be hyper organized? I teach in another class, and I'm already noticing that the people who don't follow these directions, they're already getting their files mixed up. So by doing this, you're forcing all your files to be very organized, and then you don't run into situations where like you did the whole assignment and then you turn in the wrong file and then you don't notice it for 4 weeks. You're like, why did I get a 20 on this assignment? And it's like, oh, it's because I had some old version that, So this keeps you very, very organized. You're seniors, you probably know all this stuff, but I guess reminders are always good. Okay, then we're going to go to File, New. And let's use this HTML shell website. What do I have in links? Oops. I want to make sure I always have links to these things. Oh, okay. I called it a funny name, HTML boilerplate code, but that's the one for HTML shell. We have brackets, we have W3 schools. Okay, got everything I want to cover today. And then go to this HTML shell. Sorry, you can barely see it on my screen. I need to adjust the brightness. Ah, perfect. Okay. And then there's a little button here. We're going to start using this all the time. It says include viewport meta tag. Just from now on, every single time we grab this boilerplate code, let's go ahead and click yes. And it adds a little line that you may not understand what it means, but it's going to start meaning something in the next couple lectures. I just want to get everyone in the habit of that. I'm learning from my mistakes. There's been past lectures when I've taught this course that I forgot to put that viewport meta tag, and the example didn't work, and I'm like sitting here scratching my head during class, and we've only got limited class time, and then somebody's like, oh yeah, we forgot the, or not we, me, forgot the, forgot that. So make sure to click that include viewport meta tag. I'll explain what it means later, but it's just one of those things. Let's get in the habit of including it. Copy, paste. Make sure, when you go to save, make sure it points to, so in my case, CGS4828, today's date, and then ex1.html. If you have that cool little plugin saved, it'll actually format everything for you nice. They have so many of these auto format plugins now that like I'm getting kind of spoiled. Like I'll work in environments where for a dozen years I formatted my own code and it wasn't that big of a deal. But now they've got these very, very clever auto formatters that like you can kind of write sloppy formatted code. You click save and it formats it nicely for you. And so now I get annoyed when I don't have that auto formatting. Like, man, I got to go through and hit the tab key a bunch of times. So formatting is extremely, extremely important. The more readable your code, the less chances you have of making mistakes because you can spot the mistakes a lot easier. Okay, so what we're going to do is, I've been using this example for a while. It's getting a little bit dated, but the reason I like this example is because it's very simple. I don't want to jump right into super advanced stuff because even though it's like a very simple example that you might not see in a real world website anymore, it's like one of those fundamental things. I'm trying to think of an example. Like in algebra, you probably learned some things. You're like, why am I learning this? You know, I can use a calculator type thing. So this is just one of those fundamental techniques. You may use it, I don't know, or maybe use some variant of it, like you could use this as a building block. The reason I used this example for so long is because, does anybody remember the old IRC website from like a year ago? This is essentially the technique that they used. So,
You had like the
yeah. We're not going to make the full site. I'm more concerned just about the layout. It'll make sense as we go. Okay. So the basic idea is that we're going to create a fixed width website, and it's going to have a banner, navigation on the top, and then 2 content areas side by side. So what I like to do a lot of times is just start kind of mentally, well, first, it's generally actually a good idea to kind of sketch it out on a piece of paper. We don't really have time for that, and it's a simple website anyway. So, but the basic idea is that you'd sketch it on a piece of paper, and what I like to do is kind of point arrows to different areas. I mean, I guess I could do that. Would that be helpful? Just to do like a 2-second sketch?
Sure.
Okay. Now granted, I'm computer science, not digital media, so my sketching is going to be very rough. Okay, so we're going to have, like, imagine this whole white screen here is going to be our whole website. Then what we're going to do is we're going to make like a fixed width container. I don't care if it's uneven. And then kind of draw something on top just to let us know that we've got a container of some sort. And so this is going to be what we call our container. And then the idea is that between here and here, so and this container is going to be fixed width. Okay, so we're going to have this fixed width container, let's say 700 pixels. And then if I wanted to center it, we talked about this a little bit, I know it's been a while. Does anybody remember the technique we talked about before the hurricane? What can I do to center a fixed width div? Margin something. Margin auto. And then what that does is it basically forces, remember the box model, we talked about that? It basically says all extra margin, equally space it out on all sides. And so that gives the effect of it being centered. And then up here, there's nothing too interesting about this. This is just going to be a banner. We'll just have it like say IRC. And then we're going to have some sort of navigation links. And then what we're going to have is some sort of content side by side. Now, for now, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to leave these blocks, and the idea is part of your homework is going to actually to be kind of to fill this in with interesting stuff. And then we're going to have to clear out our div. It'll make sense once we get to the assignment. And then for your assignment, you're going to have to actually add a footer in here. That's going to be part of your assignment, is to add a footer, but our example isn't. So you get the basic idea. It's going to be it's a fixed width page, and margins auto. Does anybody know why this design was popular for such a long time, to do these fixed width pages? Well, I might be getting ahead of myself. once we see it in a web browser, it'll make sense why these were popular. Okay, so. Okay, so translating that into code, we're going to have our big container holding everything. So what I like to do is I like to make classes for each thing. So that big thing holding everything, that's going to be our container class. Now we shouldn't always use divs, but I'm very liberal about using divs. I use them a lot. But in practice, you should probably go through W3 Schools and find the most appropriate tag. And I'll try to do that as we go through class, but sometimes you'll just find me, just because we're under time constraints, not spending 10 minutes looking for the most appropriate tag. Sometimes I'll just say, a div will work. Okay. And so we also wanted on the top to have a banner, so we're going to make another div here. Can everyone see everything okay, or do I need to turn lights like a little bit lower, or is this good? Perfect. Okay. And is the font large enough, or should I go up one more size?
It's okay.
Okay, perfect. You'd be amazed at how many people I've had in class who have like vision problems or like can't quite see, but they just don't want to say anything.
That's why I'm up close.
Okay. So it's better to ask than just assume that everyone can see. Okay, so we've got our banner. And then now we're going to need some sort of navigation. Bless you. And the navigation is going to be on the top of our page. What do you think a good navigation class, or what do you think a good class name would be for this navigation? It's going to be on the top of the page.
Header.
So not quite header.
Menus.
What's that?
Links.
Links, that's good. Let's keep on going here. What if I have, what's that? Menu, that's good too. How many people have seen, what's that? So that's actually the answer I was looking for, and we have to be careful about that. Even though it's at the top, one of the things that we want to avoid, and I've seen this happen all the time, and I've been guilty of myself on this too, is try not to have class names that say where it is on the page. The reason being is because right now our navigation is on the top, but we may move it to another place. And then so we end up in this situation where if it's like on another part of the page, it doesn't really make sense anymore. So things like menu and links are good. We may want to extend this even further, because have you noticed in a lot of web pages, they no longer just have one site navigation? What happens? You've got a main navigation, but maybe something like a per page navigation. Like if I go to digital media department, I might have the main IRSC navigation, but then off to the side I have all the little links that are specific to digital media. So let's say we're going to call it nav for navigation. What might be a little bit more of a specific name than just nav? Let's call it primary nav, because this is going to be our primary navigation. And then that works well, because now if I go to a page that has two navigation things, what could I call them? Primary nav and secondary. Perfect. And the idea is that the primary navigation is going to be the main site navigation, and then secondary is going to be maybe more specific to that page. Okay, so long story short, we're going to call this primary navigation. There's a big debate in the community about naming. There's a joke in computer science that naming is always the hardest thing, because you want to come up with a good name, because obviously a human has to read this code at some point, and if you give it a bad name, you're going to make them very upset at you. Okay. Now I'm going to do something kind of strange here. I don't know if anybody's seen this before. When you're creating an like a menu, like a navigation menu, it may not seem super obvious at first, but it's actually an unordered list. Has anybody seen this technique before? So even though we have the nav tag, which we're doing good, we want to use the most appropriate tag. I could have used a div, but I'm using the nav tag, because what's going to happen is Google's going to start crawling all these pages, and it's going to say, okay, let me look for the site's navigation. Had I wrapped this in just a generic div, it doesn't really know that it's your site's navigation. But by wrapping it in nav, we've kind of been a little bit more clear. We've given a little bit of a hint to the web crawlers. We call this very generically search engine optimization. Anytime we can do something good to help the search engine out, that's good. What we want to avoid is have a messy website that the search engine just looks at it and says, I have no clue what your content is, because then it makes your site go down in the rankings because it can't quite figure out what your site does. Okay, so this is an example of using the navigation tag to tell Google, hey, this is our site's navigation. Have you ever gone to a Google search and seen that where like you type in a site and it has the main site, but then like five or six links off of that? That's one of the things that they'll do is use things like this. Okay, but we'll be very generic. So we're going to have an unordered list, and each list item is going to be our link. So we'll be very lazy, and we won't even actually use an ahref. We'll just flat out do this. You can always fill in better content later. Sometimes what I have to do in this class is just kind of pare down things a little bit to make the code a little bit more digestible. And now notice we're still inside of container. So we've got this big container, we've got its banner, we've got its navigation, and then now below that we had these kind of sort of boxy things, these guys. Let's just be very generic. We'll just call the class box. Sometimes you'll see like a card, but to me this isn't quite a card. This is just a box. So we'll be generic. We'll say class equals box. And we're going to have two of these. So they're both going to be a part of the box class. Now we can view it, but I'm guessing there's not going to be much to view right now because we haven't actually. So we've named these classes that we want to use, but we haven't actually done anything with them. So if we see it, it's probably just going to be like this. Yeah, it's just going to be a list. So let's go up here into the head section. Make sure that your cursor is in a good spot. I've made this mistake during class myself where sometimes I'm trying to talk and do stuff at the same time and I put my style in the wrong section. Make sure it's within the head section. And then we've got style. So terminology, what type of style sheet is this? Is this external, internal, or inline? Internal, okay. So let's start to define some of these. So let's start off with the container class. Well, we know it's going to be fixed width, so let's go ahead and give it a width. And for right now, let's just say 800 pixels. That's kind of like a good round number. I don't like giving heights. It's generally a bad idea to give heights, but for right now, I'm going to give a height just so we can see it. Because what happens if you've got a div with no content, the height is essentially 0. So I'm going to add a height for now, but we want to take this away later. So let's say, I don't know, 600 pixels height. And then border, pixel solid, red. I'm going to take both of these out eventually, but this is just so we can see what we're working with easily. And then what's the last thing I need to do with this container? Remember we had talked about centering the container in the page? What CSS property do I have to use to center? Perfect. Margin auto. And now what it's going to do is, since it's a fixed width, any extra margin on either side, it's going to evenly space it. So you get the idea. I kind of shrunk it a little bit so you can still see the code. But this is our, so this thing right here in the red, this is our box model. This is our container. And then the margin auto put extra stuff on the left and right hand side. Now a very common technique is to, so I'm using body. What's this going to apply to? So this is what's called an element selector. And what's the element? Should be pretty, it's not a trick question, it's pretty obvious. It's just the body element. So right here, body, essentially what you're saying is whatever I put in here, this is going to apply to the whole page. So if you want to give your entire page a background color, which is a very common thing to do in this layout style, we can do that. We can set background color, and then let's set it to something kind of light, but that we can still see. Something bluish usually works pretty good. Well, let's go a little bit darker for now. I like this cornflower blue. Sometimes I've noticed this in lecture, if I use the colors that are too light, you can't really quite see them on the projector. So the site isn't going to look good because it's going to have lots of not very subtle colors. But the idea is that later on in your assignment, you can go back and find better colors to use. But you'll see me using lots of blues, greens, and reds, things that aren't very, very subtle, but it gets the point across. You can see what's happening on our layouts. Now, personally, I might not want the whole thing to be blue. I might just want this extra little space to have a background color, but I might actually want the main content to be white so I can actually see, you know what I mean? Like if I put some text in here, I want to actually be able to see it. So if I wanted to leave this all blue, but make this white within container, what could I do?
Put the color inside the container.
Perfect. So I do background, color, and then now I'm going to say that I want this to be white. You might use some sort of off shade of white or something. There's very clever things you can do. You can do like matte backgrounds and those sorts of things, but we'll stick to basic colors for now. And now this is cool because now we have our background color, but we've got a white area to work with for our content. So this is kind of interesting because now we're actually getting into more layout type things. We've got a page, and we've centered the content. And now because we have a fixed width div, we can be kind of consistent about how the page looks. I'll get into that more in a minute. Before I go on, every once in a while I'll do a checkpoint, make sure everyone's got their code. Does anybody need me to explain anything?
Yeah, mine's not showing.
What's that?
Mine's just like blue. I don't have a box.
Uh,
Did you put it in the container?
Did you do dot container?
Yeah.
Let me take a look at it. The other thing I would usually recommend is making your font sizes really large so you can see what's going on. We've got
Thank you. I'm sorry.
Oh, you know why? Because it's shrunk. Make sure that the B in body is lowercase. Should be. Let's do this. I post these after class. We're only going to do a little bit more with this example. I don't want to burn through too much class time because we're limited, but I'll help you after class. By the way, if you ever get stuck, usually I can spend like a minute or so trying to help, but unfortunately with this hybrid format, we don't have a whole lot of time. So if you ever get stuck and I can't help you, we might just have to move on, and then I can give you the example after class. Okay, so we've got that. Now let's go ahead and work on our banner. So we're going to have a banner. So we're going to say dot banner. And a very common thing to do with your banners is to have like a dark background color. Which one of these looks interesting? And then light text. We'll bold it. Give it a large font size. And then just give it some extra padding around it. You can probably see something up here, but we haven't actually added any text. So now actually go down to your banner. Try to keep both these on your screen. And then we'll just write Indian River State College. Okay, so we're good there. And then we're going to work on this. Well, let's work on it now. Actually, I'm going to get back to that because the navigation's a little bit complicated. It's not super complicated, but I want to save it for last. And then here we've got our boxes. Now, what we can do, if you remember, when we have boxes like this, I can float one of these left, float one of these right, and then clear it out. Remember the clear fix hack that we talked about? So what I'm going to do is they're both going to belong to the box class, but what I can do is I can additionally, remember the cascading part of cascading style sheets, is that I can get everything that the box class gives me, which we don't want to have anything in there yet, but then I can say, in addition, I also want it to, this one to float left, and this one to float right. And that's going to put them side by side. Now the only thing that we have to also do is we have to do this thing. It's called the clear fix hack. Basically, once we're done using floats, we have to say, okay, clear out our divs, go back to normal mode. So all I did was took our two boxes, I added style float left, style float right, and added this thing here called the clear fix hack. Now, right now, our boxes aren't going to be very interesting because they're essentially empty, so we can't see anything. So let's do this. Let's go ahead and make our box class, and let's just give it a fixed width and height. Again, we should eventually remove heights, but it's kind of nice to do temporarily just because it kind of gives you something to look at without having to use lorem ipsum text. When I'm doing layouts, I like to work with kind of blocks rather than trying to actually insert content, and then the next phase I'll go back and start actually inserting content. Okay, so the width of this is going to be 800 pixels. So if we've got two boxes, what I could do is 400 and 400, but in practice that's not super great because there's always little pixels, stray pixels here and there. So let's do this. Let's just do a little bit less than 400. So we'll say 380 pixels. We'll give it a height, but again, we want to get rid of that eventually. And let's give it a background color just so we can see. Eventually, we would probably remove this background color or put it to something a little bit more subtle. But let's just put something very distinct. What's that? Oh, yeah. You wouldn't do this in a real world website, by the way. This is just so you can see. You'd use a lot more subtle things. It's just, I've noticed in the past sometimes on the projector, if I use something very subtle, it doesn't always come across. On a website like this, in practice, you'd probably use something like a very, very light gray type background, or maybe like a linear gradient, or like something like a matte type thing in the background. Starting off, I would actually probably honestly just leave this as just a white background. I just wanted you to be able to see these. Okay, now let's tackle the navigation. The navigation actually turns out to be a little bit tricky. So we're going to talk about, at the end of class, we're going to talk about something called Flexbox. But if you just want to take these links, if you want to take these links and kind of spread them across the page, there's not really a super easy way to do that. There used to be some old hacks to kind of do that, to make it a table instead. But now we have something called Flexbox. So I'm going to write the code. I'm not going to explain the code because we're actually going to do a whole, probably 2 lectures on Flexbox. But let's go to, so we've got our primary navigation. But the actual primary nav tag isn't actually that useful by itself. What we're concerned about is this UL underneath. So nav isn't really doing anything. It's just kind of saying this is my navigation, but really everything happens under this unordered list. So what you can do, have you seen this before, where you can do a class and then say, okay, find this class and then find the UL underneath this class? Has everyone seen that before? And so the first thing we want to do is get rid of these little bullets. So we can say that list style type is going to be none. And so the first thing you'll notice is that the bullet points go away. Perfect. Now we're going to use something called Flexbox. I'm not going to really explain, but you'll see. So we set the display property to flex. And this is kind of interesting because now all of a sudden we can, it's no longer vertical. Now it's horizontal. Well, it turns out this Flexbox is really, really, really powerful. So there's a link in here somewhere. Flexbox. If you just Google for CSS tricks Flexbox, this is the first thing that comes up. But you can see how complicated it is. You can actually set the direction and all kinds of other interesting stuff with it. But what we care about is this justify content property. Because right now by default it's flex start. And notice how everything kind of jumbled up at the start. So right now it's set to flex start. Well, what if we had set it to flex end? Should be pretty obvious. It jumbled it up on the other side, but that's not really what we want. We probably want something more like this. So let's start with space between. Let's see how space between looks. And what that'll do is that'll actually evenly space these items within the container. I don't want to get overly technical on this because, like I said, we're going to dedicate a few lectures, but we're going to do, what did I say? We're going to do space. Let's do space between first. So now this is good. We're almost there, but we noticed something kind of weird off to the side here. This actually has nothing to do with Flexbox. When you're creating websites, you're going to run into this all the time because a lot of elements have some sort of default formatting associated with them, and list is an example of that. So what I'm going to do is, there are these tools called Chrome Developer Tools. They don't actually work that great when you're using brackets. So what I'm going to do is actually go over to our folder for today. I'm going to go to Developer Tools, pull this off to the side here. Oh, no, I can't cheat and do that. Anyway, all I'm looking for is the stray, whatever is going on here, margin padding, whatever it is. And so with these developer tools, what you can actually do is you can hover over it and you say, okay, there's some extra something going on here. And I don't really have quite enough room. You can actually get like this full box that tells you exactly what's going on, but I can just tell right here that there's some extra something. It looks like it's either, this looks like it's margin. I suspect it actually might be padding. So the easiest way sometimes is just to experiment. So let's set under UL, let's try to set it on the individual list item. Let's see how that works. Well, yeah, let's try that. So we're going to say style padding left is 0 pixels. Nope, that didn't help us. Make sure that it's not margin left. Nope, okay. So it's not on that, so it's going to be on the unordered list. I was right the first time. So under here, under UL, what we would do is we would say padding left is going to be 0 pixels. There we go, okay. So there's just some extra padding by default. We didn't add it, but that's normally where the bullet points would be, and we say, okay, we don't want extra padding to leave room for a bullet point because we're not going to be using a bullet point. So this is really cool and powerful because what we did, and I realized we went through this example a little fast, but I'll post the source code. This is going to be one of our larger examples. It's not going to be like this every class. A lot of times the examples will tend to be smaller. And I'll post the code after class. But that's really powerful because we took this page that was using an unordered list that had bullets and everything, and we made that unordered list into a navigation. Now let's do one more thing here. Space between, that might not look great. What we can do is space around, and what space around does is it evenly spaces on both sides. Notice the difference between it. So space between goes all the way up to the edges and puts all the space between. Space around gives us that extra little bit on the edges. So let's change it to that. I'm going to say space around. And notice that might be a little bit better here. Okay, so I'm going to post, I know I went a little fast just because of this hybrid format, and I have a couple more things I want to go through. But that's essentially your homework assignment. Your homework assignment is that you're going to take this basic structure of a page, and then you're going to actually start to fill it in with content. So if you go to the assignment, that's going to be sort of your starting point. Choose different background colors, stuff that's a little bit more subtle. You know, I chose very dark and contrasting colors just so you could see what's going on. But these little boxes right here give these rounded corners. Does anybody remember the property to make rounded corners? It's called border radius. So do a little bit of research into border radius, and that'll round out these corners so that it's no longer boxy. And I'm giving you kind of some creative freedom. You're seniors in here. I'm just kind of giving you basic guidelines of where I want you to. So I'm not telling you the exact number of pixels and stuff. Experiment, whatever looks best for your page. Modify this banner. You can use an image, or you can just do like we did here. Maybe add some extra padding. Do whatever looks best for your site. Create a simple navigation. It doesn't need to have drop-down style menus, just like we did here. This is good enough. And then add a footer with some extra footer information. So on our page, we didn't add a footer, but research the footer tag, and then fill some stuff in, actually start to put in lorem ipsum text. And you're going to be graded on the proper use of your HTML and CSS, fulfilling these requirements, and then just overall effort. I've seen some people who technically met all the requirements, but it was pretty obvious they didn't put a lot of effort into it. So if you do that, you'll still get an A. It's not going to be 100, but if you meet all the requirements and all your HTML is good, I might give you like a 95. But that last 5% is like, how much effort did you actually spend on the thing? Did you finish it in 10 minutes, or did you actually sink in maybe an hour or two into it? Okay. Any questions on this assignment? I apologize. I really hate having to do this a little bit rushed because of this format, but it's just the way it is. I want to get through maybe a couple more examples. And this shouldn't take too long to do. That's why I only give it a week. You should be able to do it in about a week. If it turns out next class, after talking with everybody, that you need a couple more days, I might extend it a couple more days. But for now, let's stick to a week. Okay, let's do another example here. So let's do file, or let's do this. Let's go over to W3 Schools. We're going to talk about media queries. So under links, kind of near the bottom here, there should be a link called media queries. Actually, I don't like this link. They have another link a little bit below it. See how this is media queries? Let's go to RWD, which stands for Responsive Web Design. Let's go down to these media queries. Does everyone see that? I hate to change things up like that, but I'll fix the link at some point. So we'll go to RWD, Responsive Web Design Media Queries. Okay, so what is a media query? What big technology has happened in the past 10 or so years that has changed websites and website building? Smartphones, exactly. And it used to be that what I could do is create a website the reason that this was a very popular layout technique is because this is fixed width. So what happens is that back in the up to the maybe mid 2000s, people would have different monitor sizes, but they weren't really that much different. Like, it was the difference between somebody looking at your website on a 13-inch monitor versus a 17-inch monitor. You know what I mean? Even when HD monitors came out, there wasn't that big of a difference. And so what you notice is that when you've got different screen sizes, what happens to that center container? Does it stay the same exact size? Yeah, it's just the stuff around it kind of flows. So this was kind of a cheating thing that we did for a long time in the web design world, is if you had this fixed width container right here, you're guaranteed that your site would pretty much look the same on all different monitors. I remember back in the early days before people started doing this, it was frustrating because you'd go to a site and depending on your monitor size and different combination of browser, it would look different. And I think people just got fed up. And this is what's called pixel perfect design, is that because you've got this fixed width container, you know exactly where everything's going to be. Now here's the problem. So like you mentioned, we have smartphones. And now we've got this giant range of devices that we have to make our website look good on. It has to look good from the smallest smartphone all the way to some 80-something inch smart TV, because sometimes people will do that. They'll put like some smart TVs you'll actually web browse. I'm sure it's not the norm, but you get the idea. Or maybe even just like say a 4K monitor. Okay, so your website has to look on all these, good on all these. Does anybody remember ever visiting the old IRC site on your smartphone? So what would happen? What would it look like? Yeah, you'd get something like this, right? And what you'd have to do, you'd have to pinch zoom. How many people have seen sites like that before, where you'd have to pinch zoom around?
Yeah.
And this is what happens, is that the smartphone, if you actually try to display the entire site on the smartphone, you get this very shrunken version of the site, and then you have to pinch zoom and go around. That whole decision was basically made on the idea of when smartphones came out, they said none of these sites actually support mobile or small screen sizes. And so that was kind of their hack to say, okay, well, at least you can still view the site. It's not going to be fun. You're going to have to pinch zoom around. But it's, then what people started to do was they started to make two websites. They would make a mobile version and a desktop version. The problem with that is that it's a giant headache to maintain. So now what we do is that we have responsive websites, and a lot of that is based on this idea of the media query. I'll post some videos I found on what the viewport is, but essentially the viewport is your device's size. So by default, smartphone, so on a computer monitor, just a regular screen, that is going to be, the viewport's going to be your screen. On smartphones, what they did is they made this like virtual viewport, so you can kind of make it so that you can pinch zoom through the site or whatever. But this right here, this is what we're going to always have to add. That's what we added on this HTML shell, that when we're doing responsive sites, this basically says, okay, I know I'm working on a mobile device. I know it's going to have to be viewed on a mobile device. I've taken care of that. Okay, so that's all that essentially does. You don't have to really get into the details of it, but it just makes it so that when you actually create a responsive site, it's going to look correct on a mobile device. So here's the idea of a media query. A media query is selective CSS based on rules. 99% of the time, those rules are going to be the width of the actual device. Okay, so let's go here. So I'm under W3 Schools, CSS responsive, media queries, and then let's go to this try it yourself. Now what this is doing is that we have, can everyone see this okay, or does it need to be a little larger? Okay. So we've got our CSS style from here to here. Now here we're saying that we want the background color of the body to be light green. These are read from top to bottom. Then what you do is that we make this media query rule that we say on regular screens, don't worry about what this means. We're just going to always add this. You can add other things, like you can say, okay, I want this rule to apply if I'm printing or if it's on a TV or something like that. We're going to do all of our assignments and everything in here on either phones or PCs or Macs. You know, I mean, regular screens. We're not doing these weird things like when we're printing. So don't worry about that. And then we're going to say from 0 pixels to 600 pixels. So we're saying that the max width, does that make sense? So we're saying up to this number of pixels, I want this rule to apply. And so what we're saying here is that from 0 to 600 pixels, I want it to override that background color, and I want it to be light blue. So notice that anytime it's wide, it's greater than 600 pixels, it's going to take the default. But notice what happens as soon as we go below 600 pixels. It turned light blue. This is really cool because now we can have conditional CSS rules that say format the site a little bit different. Now this is a very manufactured example because you're not going to change the color of the site. Does that make sense? Like you wouldn't view the site on a desktop as green and then all of a sudden the site's blue on mobile. That's kind of a pointless rule. It just is visually what you see. What ends up happening is that you do layouts. So what you can start doing is you can start making layout rules. Because if you've ever gone to a site, my favorite example is always the Audubon Society. I joke about this. This is like the only site that doesn't offend anybody. So and so this is their normal site. And on a desktop, this makes sense. It's got a 3-column layout. These developer tools are really cool because we can actually say, okay, so what does it look like on a desktop? Shrinks, 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 shrinks. Oh, all of a sudden you've hit a mobile device? What happens? You've probably seen this on other sites. It didn't go through, it went from a 3-column layout to what? Just a single column. And that's you probably, a lot of you may have not even thought about that. That's just sort of assumed on mobile devices, right? That if you go to a site and it's got a multi-column layout on your phone, it's going to be pretty hard to navigate. So the kind of the de facto standard is that once you hit the level of portrait mode on a mobile device, you're probably just going to want a single-column layout. And that's how you actually get this effect, is by using these media queries. Now, these media queries are very, very low level. It's like they're like building blocks. Once we get later in the course, we're going to use some CSS libraries that make it a little bit easier, but you have to learn the fundamentals first, okay? So let's take this code right here. Let's copy it, and let's make an example 2 instead of brackets, and save this as ex2.html. So let's do this. On this paragraph, let's grab some lorem ipsum text. I know we're here till 10:15, right?
Yep.
Okay. The clock on the Macs are wrong, by the way. It's actually 10:02.
Yeah.
I thought you were getting out of here earlier. Okay. So let's grab some lorem ipsum text. One paragraph of it is probably good enough. And actually, let's do this. I'm changing my mind. Instead of doing it as a paragraph, do it as a div. So we're going to have this div inside of the body, and then paste in lorem ipsum. So this is what your body should look like. You've got your body, a div, and then a big block of lorem ipsum. So now let's do this. Let's say, okay, we want that div. Remember we did this before, we had a fixed width div. So we're going to say that, okay, we want that div to be let's say we want that div to be 600 pixels. And we want it to be centered. And for now, let's actually get rid of this part right here. It's not going to, well, we can leave it. It's not going to hurt anything. We're going to get rid of it eventually, but it's not hurting anything, so I'm just going to leave it for now. And now if we go back to our site, notice what weird effect are we getting here? That once we hit, say, mobile devices, say 600 pixels, what's it going to look like on a like an older iPhone?
Very
Tiny.
Very tiny, right? And the reason that's happening is because we set the width to 600 pixels. So let's go ahead and get rid of this body. What we want to say is that, okay, normally it's going to look like that. But as soon as we hit a device that's between 0 and 600 pixels, what do we want to do with this div? Let's say instead of it being a fixed width div, let's just say, okay, well, we've hit a mobile device. Let's just say we want it to be 100%. We don't actually need it to be 600 pixels wide anymore. We're just going to say, let it be 100% wide. And then now, as soon as I hit 600 pixels, it's actually going to start to reflow the text. It's not going to shrink it. Do you see what happened? So here it's saying that the width of that div is going to be 600 pixels. But now it's just 100%. So if you need to reflow the text, that's fine. But we're not specifying a width anymore. Everyone see what happened there? That's why these things are useful, is because you can say, okay, I want it to act differently on a mobile device. And these rules are read from top to bottom. Notice that it didn't override the body. It only overrode what we told it to. We said we just wanted to override div. So that's the only thing that got overridden. Okay. We'll talk about this more. This is a very gentle introduction. This is going to come up over and over and over again. What I'm doing today is I'm just kind of giving you some introductory stuff. The other thing is I want to talk about this Flexbox a little bit more. Okay, so let's go to, under resources, it's Flexbox. Yeah, so we're under, under links. And if you scroll down, you should see Flexbox. It should be this CSS Tricks Complete Guide to Flexbox. So Flexbox is really, really cool because for the longest time we had all kinds of layout issues. It was doing any sort of layout on the web was a giant pain. And what this does is it's short for flexible box. Basic idea is that if I want some vertical items, if I want some horizontal items, if I want to order them. Basically anything where you've got what's called a container. So make sure you know this concept. This outside container, this purple thing, and then you've got a bunch of individual items inside of it. Okay? Now to enable Flexbox, all you have to do is just do this on the parent container, do set display to flex, which is pretty much what we already did. And let's just do some quick experiments. I think we have time. Okay, so let's go to HTML shell. Make sure that this viewport tag is on. Include meta viewport, yes. I know I'm cutting it close, but it'll be recorded, so if I go fast, you can always go back and rewatch these. And then save this as ex3.html. While you're doing that, just a quick note, the only thing you'll need for your assignment is example 1. So 2 and 3, this is just stuff I'm showing you for later. Your assignment is based off of example number 1. Okay. Now inside of the head section, let's make 2 classes. One is going to be called, so we have to do style. We're going to have one called container. That's going to be our outside container. That this thing right here in the purple, that's going to be our container. And then we're going to have a class called items, and that's going to be the orange boxes. So our container, we can just say, okay, enable it. So it's going to be display flex. And by default, its direction is row. But let's just go ahead and specify that. And then let's just make a bunch of items that are essentially a box. So it's going to be a width of 150 pixels, height of 150 pixels. And then let's just give it a little bit of margin so we've got some, so there's a little bit of space between them. We should be done with this example very, very quickly. And then now inside of body, we're going to have a container div. That class is going to be called container. And then item, and let's just copy and paste 4 of these. Okay, so this is, wait a minute. But all I did was I took a regular page, I added style, I had this container class. Oops, let's do item as singular. So here I wrote items, let's just make it item singular. And then our class down here, we're going to have a class called container, and then individual items. I'm going to go back to regular mode. There. Okay, so we've got 4 boxes. Okay. So perfect. So we've got these 4 boxes. What's cool about this Flexbox is, okay, right now it's going in the direction of row. If we want, we can say, okay, instead, I want it to be a column. And just by changing one thing, we've taken our Flexbox and we've made it from a row to a column. This is really, really powerful because now we can do all kinds of interesting things that used to be giant CSS hacks. And just by changing a couple of parameters, a couple of CSS properties, now we can have our content flow in all kinds of really interesting ways. Flexbox is really, really, really powerful. Okay, we're pretty much out of time, so that's about all I can do for this example. But we'll start on that next class. I only have 3 minutes left. So your assignment is based off of this example 1, examples 2 and 3. I know I went through them fast, but I'm just kind of introducing you to them. We're going to probably spend 2 or 3 lectures on media queries in Flexbox. We're going to spend a lot of time. We actually might spend even more than that on Flexbox. It's just going to be like a reoccurring theme throughout the semester. And then don't forget about your assignment. So I don't think anybody really needed the extension for assignment number 1, so I'll grade that soon. If you did, just get it done by the end of the day. If anybody needs help zipping it, hang out after class, I'll help you with that. And then assignment number 2 is due in a week. And then just email me if you have any problems. But essentially, it's just taking that example and filling it out with some extra content. Everyone good with that? Okay. 2 minutes left. Any questions? I apologize I have to go so fast. Was this like so fast that you couldn't keep up at all? Or is this like just a little fast? Everyone's good? Okay. It's just the format. They made it hybrid instead of full length, so I have to squeeze everything in. Okay, perfect. All right, if you have any questions at all, don't hesitate to email me. But if not, I'll see everybody next week and have a good next few days of class.
Check that out. So I got everything. It's just like the white box is not showing up. That's the only thing.
Here, can you put it down? So we've got, let's check this one out. So we've got our outside parent container, perfect. Got our banner. Got our navigation, good. Visual ideas, good. And then you put your, that's correct. It's always the little things.
Oh, okay. Oh. So I go to art school, right?
Yeah, no problem. It happens. I always tell people don't use names that are difficult to type because you'll almost always end up making a typing mistake and driving yourself crazy.